Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Comparing Monster CRs. What I intend to do with this video, as I've explained in my shorts, is comparing the printed versions of monsters to their corrected versions. And in this episode, I want to take a look at the Kobold CR for this instance. So what we'll be looking at first is the Kobold as a printed CR1/8, but actually a CR1/4 as I had found in my shorts. What this shows us is that the Kobold is actually more dangerous than intended to be, and we actually need to scale back our monsters just a little bit. What I'm about to show you is what it would look like at the table, at least on roll 20. And we're going to go through some examples of the dangers of incorrect CRs, the overall damage we could find, average damages, player KOs, and player damage as well. Now, we have 3 players for this encounter that we'll be running here to look at our kobolds with. And then when we normally build out our encounters, 9 kobolds at the CR1/8 will total us at an XP of 225 for the encounter. Now, when we want to work out the rules from the DMG about adjusting the XP encounter and trying to get the total amount throughout the entire day, 9 kobolds at CR1/8 and 25 XP will be an adjusted XP of 562. Now, if you don't use the rules for building encounters through the DMG, and maybe you use Xanathar's Guide like I do for building encounters, we'll see that instead of going through all the math here, we can simply take our level 2 characters, pit them up against CR1/8s, and we'll find that for every 1 hero we have, we can use 3 of these kobolds, for a total of 9, which is what we'll see in this encounter following this. So, with that out of the way, let's meet our adventurers. First off, we have Poppy O'Melon, the level 2 paladin of Tyr. She is a human variant because min-maxing be boring that way, and her background is the acolyte to go along with her being a paladin of Tyr. Next up, we have Zathuvi. He is a level 2 rogue, a tabaxi, natural choice for stealthy missions. The background is smuggler because your cat is always stealing from the neighborhood and bringing it home to you. And Zath comes with the racial abilities of Laser Eyes, 60 feet of dark vision, Zoomies, double movement for 1 turn, can't double move again until you chill the F out, and Cat Scratch Fever, you climb real good and have danger mittens. And finally, we have Elna. They are a level 2 Circle of Stars druid. They are also a half moon elf. The background is Sage because they run a planetarium instead of just showing the actual stars out and about to their people. They also have the starry form from their Circle of Druids ability, which is really just body paint, let's be real. And with our adventurers met, let's take a look at what they might be doing and in this scenario fighting off some kobolds. For this adventure, there was a mining operation in these tunnels that struck it rich and they hit a huge, vast section of wealth. Over the night, there was a sudden infestation of kobolds trying to extract that wealth for their master, and the adventurers were contracted to help clear out the mines so that the mining company could get back to striking it rich. Little do the adventurers know that the kobolds are laying in wait to sneak attack the adventurers as they come into the tunnel. So before battle, we have our kobolds with an average stealth rating of 14, and the party stealth is at an average of 11, where Zathufi is stealth at 24, Elna thinks they are stealthed at 8, and Poppy said nope with her 0. Since not all sides are completely stealthed, no one's getting a surprise round, and as the party moves into range, the kobolds will attack, and that's where we start off our adventure with. Now that we have our party met and our adventurer situation handled, let's get right into round 1 of combat. As the party moves into the tunnels further with Poppy in the lead, Esso, one of our kobolds, acts first. Using cover of the plants in this cave, fires a stone from their sling with advantage of stealth, but because they are at long range has disadvantage, this becomes a regular attack. Poppy is hit with a 16, just meeting Poppy's AC for 5 points of damage. Poppy's hit points drops from 18 to 13 here. Now that Esso's turn is done, we move to Hugs, who got the next highest initiative. Hugs rushes up to attack Poppy with their little stabby stab dagger, but Poppy reacts with an opportunity attack because of their polearm trainings and other feats and such, and is able to hit Hugs as they come running in with a 23, striking the kobold for 8 points of damage, and Hugs is unfortunately KO hugging the ground. KO counter kobold 1. Turn 2 is next to attack, and seeing that Hugs was easily wiped out, they also use their sling to attack from long range, which gives disadvantage, but because they were stealth, they have advantage as well for a regular attack. The attack is a miss, unfortunately, with an 8 against Poppy's AC of 16, and could have been a total of 6 points of damage. Now with Turtu's turn out of the way, we move over to the player side for Zathufi, who gets a chance to attack from the shadows since they had an incredible stealth rating, but of course because he is a rogue. Zathufi having advantage on the attack because of their incredible stealth, and being within short range of their bow, targets Orku, one of the kobolds we haven't met yet. The attack hits with an 18 against the kobold's AC, and deals 5 points of damage, which is just enough to KO Orku. And the KO counter for kobolds is increased to 2. Orku also takes a dirt nap. For Zath's bonus action, he decides to hide and rolls a stealth of 15. Now we move to Veld, who is next in the turn order, and moves up to short range to attack with their sling. Having the stealth, they are still at advantage, but stays just within the 20-foot range needed to attack Poppy. Veld winds up their sling and attacks Poppy with a sling, hitting with a mighty 21 to hit, and dealing Poppy 6 points of damage, dropping Poppy from the 13 she had down to 7 hit points. Now that Veld's turn is over and just staying on the short range for their sling, we move on to Dis, another kobold in the initiative order. Dis also moves up to short range for the attack, gets advantage because of the stealth, but misses unfortunately with an 11 and possibly could have done 3 points of damage. Next up, finally, is Poppy, who throws their torch at the beginning of the turn, revealing 6 in the background there, and then moves up to Dis to attack. Her first thing to do is attack with her spear. She rolls an 8 and unfortunately misses, could have possibly doing 8 points of damage. But luckily, because of her polearm trainings and such, she's able to follow up with a bonus action attack of the spear butt, and just hits the kobold, dealing 6 points of damage, also KOing Dis. Unfortunately, Dis is discontinued. We are now at KO counter, kobolds 3. Now that Poppy's turn is done and they decide not to move any further, Era is up next, and Era moves up to short range to attack with their sling, and has advantage because of the stealth to attack Poppy. Unfortunately, they roll a 9 to hit, and misses doing 6 points of damage to Poppy. Now that Era's turn is up, we move on to Dolpe. Dolpe moves up to short range and attacks with their sling at advantage as well to attack Poppy. They end up rolling a 20 and dealing 4 damage to Poppy, bringing her down from the 7 she had down to 3 hit points. Poppy is now in critical threat of being knocked out, the first of all the adventurers. Now that Dolpe's turn is done, we move on to Orku, who is unfortunately KO'd. Next up is Zix. Zix is annoyed to have the torch reveal their position. They rush up and snuff out the torch, putting the whole tunnel into complete darkness. Unfortunately, this is only going to affect Poppy, as Zath and Aelna both have dark vision and can see up to 60 feet away. Zix then decides to move back into their hiding spot, and ends their turn where they first started. And last to go in round 1 is Aelna. They move up to see Dolpe. Aelna decides to cast Fairy Fire with a DC 13 to catch Dolpe, Turtu, and Esu in the casting range. Unfortunately, all of the kobolds are easily able to see what Aelna is doing because they are not very graceful and called out a little too loud about their plans while casting magic. And Dolpe rolls a 17 to avoid, Turtu rolls a 21, and Esu also rolls a 15, each of the 3 kobolds passing the DC check to not be covered in Fairy Fire, or Star Forms as Aelna would like to put it. Although they avoid being covered in the Fairy Fire, the area is now glowing. And because of the possibility of Fairy Fire hitting 3 targets here, we could possibly see an upwards of 30 effective DPR here, since we would counter 10 per target here. And with that, we come to the end of round 1. So let's take a look at the tallies so far and see what we have for our stats. For the kobolds, so far we have a total damage output of roughly 30, actual damage of 15 all on Poppy, with an average kobold damage of 5 DPR. We also have 3 of the kobolds completely KO'd out of the 9 that we started with here for this adventure. As for the adventurers, they could have potentially output a total of 57 damage, but only actually dealt 19. This averaged out to roughly 8 damage per round, and we had no KO so far, although Poppy is on the edge of being knocked out first. Now that we have that situated, let's look at round 2 and see what happens between our kobolds fending off their new riches and the adventurers trying to clear out all these kobolds here. We start with Esso, who rushes out of the Fairy Fire to go and stab Poppy. And Esso is able to strike Poppy because of the disadvantage Poppy has, giving Esso advantage. and strikes with a 21 to hit Poppy for 5 points of damage. Poppy is now KO'd, and we have a adventurer count KO of 1. Next we'll move to Turtu in the initiative order, who runs out of the Fairy Fire and decides to take a sling attack against Aelna, since they're the ones that caused this craziness with the Fairy Fire. They have disadvantage for the attack because of how far they are away from Aelna, and they end up rolling a 10 on the die to hit, missing with a possibility of 5 damage, which didn't connect. With Turtu's turn out of the way, we move back to Zath, who is going to move up to defend Aelna, targets Turtu from the shadows with his short bow, at advantage, and hits with a 14, dealing 5 points of damage, which is enough to put Turtu into the ground, and KOs another kobold. For the bonus action, Zath decides to hide back in the shadows once again, and rolls a 10, not the greatest stealth for a rogue, but these things happen. Next up in the turn order is Veld. They use a perception check to find Zath, at disadvantage because of the darkness in the area, even though they have dark vision up to 60 feet away. With their disadvantage roll, they end up with a 15 on the check, spots Zath, and calls out his location. This doesn't really help Zath whatsoever, even though the kobolds have a passive perception of 8. Next up in the turn is Dis. Dis is KO as well. Moving on, we go to Poppy, who is also face down in the ground, rolling their first death save for the game, and we end up with a crit! Oh goodness, Poppy is back up with 1 hit point and stands up. Grabbing her spear in hand, she moves up to Esso, attacks at disadvantage because of the darkness, but still manages to connect with a 17, dealing 5 points of damage and enough to put Esso in the ground as well. She then moves to Dolpe to attack with her spear butt for a bonus action, and gets a regular swing because of the Fairy Fire lighting up the area. She connects with a 23, dealing a mighty 8 points of damage from just the spear butt alone, also putting Dolpe in the ground, KOing yet another kobold for this round of combat, which would make that 2 kobolds for this round of combat on top of the 3 previously. Now that Poppy's turn is done, Era is next in the initiative, and Era moves up to attack Poppy with their dagger. Poppy not being able to really see Era come up to hit, Era rolls a mighty 19 to hit with the dagger and deals Poppy 3 points of damage. Poppy is once again in the ground because she only had 1 hit point to stand with. Now that Era is yipping in excitement for defeating the Paladin of Tyr, we move on to Dolpe, who is also face down in the ground, as well as Orku, who would be next in turn, and they are also on the ground, bleeding out. After that, we have Zix, who is second to last in the initiative, and they decide to move up to Aelna, even though Zath was called out prior to this, and decides to attack Aelna because of the Fairy Fire as well. The sling attack is at long range and puts the attack at disadvantage. Unfortunately, Zix rolls a 7 and misses, which could have possibly dealt 3 points of damage. Zix decides to stand where they're at, and the turn moves to Aelna once again. Finishing up round 2 of combat, Aelna decides to use their bonus action, cast a healing word to Poppy, restoring 6 points of hit points to Poppy, and allowing her to wake up in the darkness of this cave once again. Now with their regular action, they decide to infest Zix with Infestation, which is a DC 13 to pass. Zix fails the roll and ends up taking 4 points of damage, almost enough to completely outright defeat Zix. But because of the infestation and the fireflies that Aelna likes to flick about, Zix randomly moves to the east 1 space and ends their turn a little closer to Zath and Aelna, but a little further away from Poppy. Is this good or bad? Who knows, we'll find out in round 3. Now for the end of round 2 stats. Kobolds, we've seen a total of 16 points of damage, actual damage turned out to be 8, and the average kobold damage was 4, and we also had 3 KOs for this round. As for the adventurers, they had a total of 22 points of damage, actual damage was also 22 damage, and the average for them was 5. This time we had 2 KOs coming from Poppy alone. And with that out of the way and all the stats for round 2, let's finish up with round 3 of combat. Unfortunately, the first 3 turns in combat are for Esso, Hugs, and Turtu, who are all KO on the ground. So we'll start this round of combat with Zath, who moves to Aelna, targets Era out in the distance with their short bow, and critically hits, dealing 12 points of damage, and applies the sneak attack as well since they had the ability to do so thanks to Poppy. Dolpe hits the ground KO, and Zath moves back into the shadows to hide with a stealth of 17. Next up in the turn is Veld, who moves up to attack Poppy, but Poppy finally decides to react, but misses with the spear attack with an 8 to hit. There could have been a total of 11 points of damage, but unfortunately the miss did not deal it. Veld decides to hit with their dagger and ends up hitting with a 20. A dirty 20, but a 20 nonetheless that gets past Poppy's AC rating, dealing 3 points of damage and bringing Poppy that much closer to KO death territory once again. Poppy has 3 hit points and is in critical condition. Finishing up the turn, we move on to Dis, who is unfortunately on the ground. We move back to Poppy, who stands up to attack Veld. Using their action to spear attack, they have disadvantage on the attack due to the darkness, and critically misses, rolling a 7 total. This could have been a total of 7 points of damage, but because of the darkness, the swing goes wide. Following that up with a bonus action, Poppy decides to use the butt attack to hit again, also at disadvantage, but hits this time with a 16, dealing 6 points of damage and KOing Veld. Veld hits the ground hard, and we move on to Zix, since Era, Dolpe, and Orku are also on the ground KO'd. Zix assesses the situation and decides it's time for them to escape to warn the rest of the kobolds further in the mines. That's their turn, double moving out of the map and out of the encounter. Round 3 finishes up with Aelna, who attempts to follow Zix but can't reach to do that last point of damage, and the heroes collect themselves, lick their wounds, and take a short rest to heal up from this mighty encounter with the kobolds. As for the end of round 3 stats, we have the kobolds, who only dealt a total of 3 points of damage. The actual damage was 3 as well, so the average damage was 3. We had a total of 2 KOs this time, and that's it for the kobold stats. As for the adventurers, we had a total of 42 possible damage. Actual damage turned out to be 18, with an average damage of 8. With 0 KOs for this turn, it was pretty close though. We almost had one from Poppy once again. And now for the final stats of 3 rounds of combat for our printed 1/8 kobolds. The total possible damage was 49, the 3-round average was 4 damage per round, and the KOs were 8 out of 9. Now as we see here for the 3-round average for the kobolds, they got an average of 4 damage per round. This lines up with the printed version from the book for our kobolds. Taking a look at the adventurers, they had a total possible damage of 121 damage. The 3-round average for them was 7 DPR, and they had a total of 2 KOs. Since this video has taken far too long as it is, this will be part 1 of comparing the kobolds from the printed version and the found version from the shorts. Come back next time as we take another look at the kobolds with the reduced damages that they do to see how the adventurers make out and to see what the averages are at the end of that video. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and this is me, Andrew, hoping that all of your encounters are even rated.